I've been doing heirloom sewing for about 10 years, and then today I'm going to be breaking down everything you need to know about needles so you can start sewing your legacy today. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. Like I said, I've been doing heirloom sewing for about 10 years now, and I've been sewing for myself long before that. And I'm going to be giving you all the information I have about needles. Needles can be like way overwhelming, especially if you're first getting into things. So let's break it all down. Okay, so you've got two things you're talking about when we're talking of needles. You're talking about needle type and you're talking about needle size. So needle type you're going to pick depending on what sort of application you're doing. So if you are just constructing a garment, that's a different application than if you're doing lace work, or if you're doing applique work, or if you're doing like some sort of needle embellishment. Those are your applications. Then you have your sizes. Okay, so those are the two things we're talking about with needles. When it comes to just constructing that garment in the heirloom land, I really like to grab a microtech needle, if I'm saying that correctly. That is a needle with a super sharp point on it, and you may have heard of a universal needle at this point. The universal needle is a jack of all trades, master of none. You can basically throw most fabrics at that needle and it will figure out how to stitch her up. But when you get into heirloom work and you want things to be a little bit more refined and those just to be just a little bit cleaner and whatever, then I really think you want to grab a microtech needle because it has that super sharp point, whereas the universal needle has a sharp point with a slight round it's slightly rounded off, okay? Which is why it's able to handle so many different kinds of fabric. So I like to keep microtech needles on hand for constructing. And then when it comes to sizing, that depends on what I'm doing. So when I like to keep size 60, 70, and 80 for constructing purposes. I like 60 for lace work. I like 70 for all my lightweight fabrics, batistas, lawns, voiles, all those yummy goodnesses. I like 80 for like the slightly heavier side of life, so things like broadcloth, Pima cottons. And when we talk about these sizes, right, 60, 70, 80, what are those sizes referring to? Well, it's a little bit of a story. So back in the 40s, I'm over here in the States, and the empirical system is a hot mess. Let's just face it, okay? It's how I think. I'm not complaining about, well, I guess I am a little complaining about it, but I was raised on it. It's how I think, whatever. At the same time, the metric system just makes a lot more sense. Side note, I went to engineering school, so I understand. I've had to deal with both systems quite a bit. So, in the 40s, over here, it sounds like we tried to clean up our hot mess when it came to needles. There was no standardized needle system at that time, and it sounds like they were like, we need to fix this. So, back in the 40s, they, of course, looked to the metric system because y'all had already had a nice system that made sense. The metric system, of course, used millimeters, and they use hundreds of millimeters. So that 60 is actually 0.6 millimeters. And what I think happened was, is instead of, they tried to make things a little bit more come off the tip of your tongue easier. So instead of saying 0.6 or 0.7 or 0.85 or point whatever, they just moved the decimal place over 2 places, and they said 60, 70, and it's a little bit easier to say. And then they called it number metric, which is not actually a unit. They just made up, I think they're trying to give credit of like, yeah, we stole this from the metric system, or we're going to call it the number metric. And so they cleaned up it that way. And that's the first number that you see on the needle. And then there's a slash and there's a second number. Well, what I think happened with that second number is at the time, we had all these needle brands, and at the time, Singer had filled in the most places, and so they just assigned whatever was the same size. They assigned the number that Singer had already gave it, some just random number, nothing, there's no measuring to that, and that's the second number that you see. So, to the best of my ability, that is what has happened. So anywho, we've got the microtech with the super sharp needle, and that's going to actually pierce through your fibers and make a very clean stitch. You've got your universal with the slightly rounded over tip, and that's just going to kind of figure out a ton of different fabrics. And then you've got your knit needle, and that one is a super rounded edge, and it's the idea with the knit needle is that it's not going to pierce any of the fibers. It's just going to kind of wiggle its way in between the knitted, what's it called? Fabric. There's the word. But we don't really use mini knits in heirloom sewing. You may use it in classic sewing, and that's all good and dandy, but they're not really all that common in heirloom sewing. So that's really what you want to keep on hand when it comes to constructing. So when it comes to embellishing, I like to keep two different types of needles on hands for those lovely holes, right? They're so pretty in heirloom sewing, all that hem stitching, the pin stitching. It's such a yummy goodness, and it's easy to do, and it's practically free. You just need the needle. So I like to keep two different types. One is the size 90 microtech needle, and then the other type is a wing needle. And this wing needle comes in two different sizes, size 100 and size 120. So the size 120 is a big old needle. It leaves a huge hole in your fabric. I'm not complaining about it, but me personally, now it's sewing, you do you, but me personally, I like to save the 120 wing needle for older kids. I just think it's a kind of a massive hole for little babies, but like I said, you do you. Size 100 wing needle I like for toddlers and even some baby work here and there, but I really like to keep that for toddlers. And then size 90 microcheck, for me, I'm just like, it is so yummy for those newborns. Leaves this tiny little hole, absolutely sparkles at you. It's just like, it's so yummy. So those are the three different needles I like to keep on hand for hem stitching and pin stitching and things of that nature. I also like to keep on hand twin needles. Twin needles are so cool because you can kind of increase the tension. You know, they've got double thread, right? Because they're a twin needle. And when you increase the tension, what's that double threading is going to cause a zigzag on the bottom of your work. And you increase the tension, it just sort of sucks it up and makes it into a pin tuck, which is such a neat little trick. Again, basically a free embellishment. You just got to buy the needle. And you can have all sorts of pin tucks. You can have them in a straight rows or like in rows, sequential rows. Or you can do like curved sort of things around a hem or wherever you want because it's sewing you do you. So those are just a fun thing to mess around with. So twin needles have two numbers. One tells you how far apart the needles are, and that's in millimeters, and then the other number tells you the size of those needles. So now that you have all these needles, how do you store them? I like to keep them in the container that they come in, and then like I might put them in, a little box or something just to keep them all consolidated into one place next to my sewing machine. And then the other thing is that if you have needles that you've maybe put like an hour of use onto that needle, you might want to store your slightly used needles separate from your completely fresh brand new needles. But really, if you pop that needle into your machine and your stitches are just a little bit off, and you've threaded your machine correctly and all the rest of it's all good and dandy, that's probably the needle has been too much, right? Too much use and is worn. So you just want to switch your needle out, and that's no big deal. It's not rocket science or anything. So you don't quite have to separate them out, but you definitely can if that makes life easy for you. The other thing is that if you have a loosey-goosey needle that's just lonely on your table, somehow escaped your organization, and you're trying to figure out what the heck this needle is, first of all, the size of it is going to be engraved onto the shank of the needle. I think it's called the shank. Smets needles are all color-coded, and you can look up the color code and what that means, and you can figure out what sort of needle that is. So that's the nitty-gritty on needles. I have other videos in this beginner's heirloom series that you can check out over here. I hope this is super helpful. If you are new to this world of heirloom sewing, welcome to it. If you have any questions, of course, put them down in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.